Hello, everybody. One Fun Guy podcast in the studio today. Today's show is being sponsored by the Clubhouse Inc. So if you like the sweatshirt I'm wearing or the hoodie and you want to get one, it's www.shoptheclubhs.com or www.shoptheclubhs.co. So today's guest is going to be Greg Watchman. He's with us here. Greg, if you want to tell us a little bit about yourself, I'll give a quick introduction and we'll get into watches.
Sure, sounds good. Thanks for having me, man. I really appreciate it. Yeah, so my Instagram handle is Greg Watchman. My name is Greg. I've been a collector for probably a good 30 years. Just all kinds of watches, and it's just grown over the years. And I work in law enforcement, federal law enforcement, and that's also part of my passion. And probably also got something to do with some of my collecting
Sure.
picks and things like that.
So let's start from the beginning then. When did you start getting into watches? At like what age and the pieces you were interested in?
Well, I mean, it was from a really young age for sure.
Okay.
I remember being really young and just always interested in watches. My uncle had a watch that I noticed. That's my first memory of a watch was something that my uncle had, and it was just like a I don't know. It might have been like a Seiko or something like that. I don't remember. I know I've been interviewed a few times and I probably changed the name a couple of times on what it was. Maybe it was a Pulsar or something. I
Okay.
don't remember. But it lit up and it was pretty cool. And I liked that as a kid. But I think just the influence of all the different movies and shows that I was watching as a kid, seeing, action stars like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Sylvester Stallone and stuff like that. And they're always wearing some sort of a watch, timing a mission. The bomb's going to go off any minute, something like that. Now, obviously, James Bond.
Right.
That's
Sure.
another big one, too. So, yeah.
Do you remember your first watch?
Yeah, it was a G Shock. Yep.
Okay. So
Yep. It was.
I grew up. My dad was a huge like watch fan, but we worked in a middle class blue collar family, so my dad couldn't afford any of this stuff. But I remember he had this watch in particular, a leather band, and it had the country of Italy on it. It was a manual wind, and it
Oh,
was
wow.
no name brand. Right, I still have the watch till today. But there's no branding on it. It's just the map of Italy, and you just wind it up, and it works. So that was my first like I saw that, and that was kind of like, and I was a young age. But my first watch that I ever had was the Casio calculator watch. I was in sixth grade. That
Love
was
it.
my start to watches, and then I went from there to like Fossil, and then my cousin bought me one when I was in high school. I wore that all the way through high school, and then as I started getting into school, so I've always worn a watch. It's been kind of my, I've had one on my wrist since I was in grade school, so it's nothing new here.
Very
So
cool,
from
man.
your journey from the first Casio to where you're at now, give us some of the kind of like intermediate watches to where you actually started getting into like heavy watch collecting, and then obviously now you play with the big boys. So let's travel through that journey.
I don't know. There's a lot of bigger boys than,
Right.
than the ones that I have. That's for damn sure. But no, yeah. Obviously, it started out with the Casio, the G Shock. I thought it was a great watch, and then it kind of got into Citizen.
Okay.
I got into Citizen watches. My parents actually got me a Citizen. It was a yachting watch, like a
Okay.
yacht racing watch. They had a yacht timer or something. They got it for me while they were on a cruise somewhere.
Okay.
So I was still, I think I was just in at the end of high school or something like that, and they gifted it to me, and I thought it was really cool. And I liked watches that had multiple features on them or
Sure.
complications, But at the time, I didn't know about really mechanical watches and things like that. I was always thinking quartz watches that had an analog and digital,
Right.
right? Like I always thought that was really cool, as ani-digi.
Mhm.
Having that ability, I thought it was really neat. So I started getting into Citizen. Then I got into Seiko. And then it progressed into my first Swiss watch was actually a Tissot.
Okay.
And it was I wanted like a gentleman's like dress watch. So it had Roman numerals on it as well as a white dial. It was like a 40 millimeter, 41 millimeter, something like that. But it was automatic and it was an
Mhm.
open case back. And when I got it, and I got it in St. Louis, Um, and it was, I mean, it was like $300.
Right.
But I was like, oh my God, I had my first mechanical watch, right? And I mean, I come from a similar background as you, blue collar. My parents were immigrants from Poland. They couldn't speak English when they came here. Actually, my mom came first, then went back to marry my father, and then they came back, and it was their dream to start their own machining company.
Okay.
And so my dad, I mean, he worked his ass off all the time. And I didn't see him so much because he was moonlighting at first, then created the business, and then eventually I started working at the business. But one of his first like Ivaraj watches was actually a Rolex,
Okay.
and that was like the first time I really knew much about a Rolex, and it was just a date just,
Sure.
um, two tone date just,
Sure.
and he was very proud of that,
Absolutely.
and at first, and when I was younger at that time, I was like, why are you spending money on something like that? You don't need that. Well, obviously, I've spent a lot of money on
Yeah.
watches over
Sure.
the years, so I
Right.
changed my tune a little bit. But I get it. I get it because it's really a lot of times with these watches, it's like it's showing. Uh, it's not that you're showing off. It's like I had an accomplishment in my
Hmm.
life, and I want to treat myself,
Right.
right? And that's kind of what it is for me. A lot of it, but it's not always just an accomplishment. But a watch sets a certain mood for me.
Right.
I've always loved aircraft, and so I liked a lot of the pilots' watches. My one of my first citizen, or my the first citizen my late wife bought me was a Citizen Blue Angels watch,
Okay.
and she surprised it with me
I love that watch.
as a gift.
Yeah.
Yeah, dude, that thing it's awesome. I mean, it's a world timer, so you can click through and see all the different time zones. It has
Yeah.
every time zone on there, so the countries
Now,
that the time zone.
Did you have the navy blue and yellow one, or is that?
No,
Oh,
blue and yellow. It
oh,
was
blue.
the
Oh,
original, the first
okay.
one that came out, and it had the Navy, the Blue Angels
Yeah.
logo on the
On
back.
the case back. Yeah.
Oh my God, love that watch. And but it had also I think two other time zones as well. So and then it had I think or not two other times, excuse me, two other alarms, a countdown timer, and a stopwatch. I mean the thing has everything except it didn't have a light. It would not light up. And I was
Okay.
like, you got everything else on this thing. Why the heck didn't she have a light?
Right.
Which was kind of a bummer about that watch. But yeah, so then it progressed. Like I said, I got that later on. I got my Citizen, or excuse me, my Tissot after that. And then I started to get interested in Breitling. I was testing with different law enforcement agencies as well as intel community on different jobs, and I was reading the Economist magazine quite heavily to keep up with current events, world affairs, things like that. And in there, I saw ads for Breitling. And when I saw some of the ads for Breitling, it would be like an aircraft carrier in the background or a submarine, very militaristic and everything. And I've never been in the military. All due, I respect all
Sure.
those that serve or had served. I just went in a different path. I went into law enforcement, but
Sure.
um, my God, that just spoke to me. And so my first like luxury brand was a Breitling B1 actually.
Okay.
So which was an analog digital watch.
Right.
And when I was picking it out, it was between the B1 and the B2. So the B2 has it is an automatic watch. So, and it's got the slide rule and all this stuff around the bezel or on the inside to calculate flight patterns, things like that, your rate of ascent, your fuel consumption, stuff that I'll never use. I'm
Sure.
not a pilot, but I just thought it was cool. So when I put a watch on like that, and mine the B1, the analog digital one, has the same thing, but it's a quartz watch, countdown timer, stopwatch, couple of alarms, similar to that Blue Angel.
Sure.
So, but yeah, I still have it, love it, man. I mean, it's a great piece.
Yeah. It's nice because you could see the transition. Let me ask you this: do you think most people? I've had this kind of same path that you did, almost to a T, right?
Oh yeah.
So my first watch that I ever bought myself when I got out of school was a Citizen, and I got it the same kind of thing trajectory. I had a Timex, and then I had the Citizen, and then I had my first Seiko. Those are great transition watches. Do you think
Oh
most
yeah.
people start that way? That like they go from like a Citizen to or a Seiko to the next step? Because that's exactly what I did.
I think so, and I think it's based on the price points.
Correct.
I mean, if you think about it, especially as a young person, unless you got maybe parents that are a little bit more well off and
Sure.
can afford something and get you something a little nicer. I mean, and no shame in that game at
Right.
all. That's good if you can do it, then great.
Right.
But some people just start at different levels. Um, but for me, yeah, that's how it
Yeah.
was, and I think a lot of people do start at that level. Like nowadays, though, with iWatches and even like the Garmins and things like that, it's
Yeah.
it's like a whole different world.
Sure.
So
It's a different ball game now completely. And
it
I
is.
agree because like I wear my Apple Watch 99.9% of the time. Very
I
rare.
don't have one. I will not
So
get one.
yeah, I don't know why. I just gravitated. Now I have when I started law enforcement myself, I had I bought a Timex, and that
Mhm.
was kind of the go-to. And then I
Yeah.
transitioned into the Casio Mudmaster. So that was kind of like my first big 50 millimeter
Oh,
kind
that's
of
a
you walk
huge
into the
watch.
room and everybody sees that thing on your wrist. So it was kind of like the Mudmaster was my flow
Yeah.
into other Casios. But then as I transitioned into doing security for the jewelry store, that was my first like really kind of I because everybody knows the Rolex and kind of maybe
Yeah.
Omega. Everyone kind of knows those watches, but I didn't know Patek Philippe. I didn't know Panerai. I didn't know like all those watches were like I have no clue what they even were. And so as I started getting into it, that's when I started moving into that direction of like luxury watches. Now I can never afford one, right? But the goal is down the road is to get to that point. So who like influences you? Like who do you like follow to see like what watches are out there? Do you have like any particular person or people that you kind of gravitate to, or is that
I mean, I follow all different kinds of people. One of the first big ones, when I started to get into Instagram was actually Houdinki. But I mean, I met Ben Clymer at an event. God, when I think they were in their fourth year of just starting. I met him at a Longa boutique in New York, and I was there. I was invited to the event by the manager at Longa, and it was happenstance. And he was telling me, he was like, "Oh, hey, we're having an event here." I was with a good friend of mine, Lowell, who's a watch collector in New Jersey. I worked in New York City for
okay?
almost 10 years in my law enforcement career, and we were there, and then the guy's like, "Yeah, you guys want to stick around for an event?" We were like, "Okay." And we were actually going to another event later that night. We were going to a Breitling event, and he said, "Yeah, it's just some group called Houdinki," and we were like, "Oh yeah, yeah, we want to
Yeah,
check this out." And we had known about Houdinki, but they were, like I said, it was still early on. So I followed them, from the beginning, and they were kind of a big influence on me. But then over the years, you've got so many other awesome people out there. I mean, Houdinki's still a great
sure.
source. But then you got people like Teddy Baldessar. And I know you said to me, offline there that
Yeah,
you found me because
that
of my interview
that
with
was my
Teddy.
introduction because I followed Teddy for a long time, at least 3 or 4 years, and I saw him start where he was just doing interviews with
Yep.
little people and kind of going over some watches to moving up to like the first big one I remember. I think it was last year. He did the sit down with Kevin O'Leary,
Yeah.
and he had all these high end watches, and Kevin O'Leary wears the red strap, right? That's his big thing.
Yeah.
Right? So that kind of got me following his rabbit hole into all these other ones, which I saw the video with him and producer Michael that they did
Yeah.
together. Then I went down the producer Michael rabbit hole with all these weird jewels, and he's got all the kinds of, he's in his own little world. It's awesome though, right? That he loves those kind of styles and
Sure.
all wears all. So that kind of took me down that realm. And then there was a Nico did a video with producer Michael where he picked them apart. He's like, this
Yeah.
guy
Nico
doesn't know
Leonard.
anything.
Oh my God,
Yeah,
he's
right.
hilarious.
So he's like, this guy buys all these $1 million watches and doesn't even know how they work. doesn't know the right. And so then I started following Nico, and I was like going down his rabbit hole. So it was just kind of a plethora of different people. But let me ask you this: so you did the sit down with Teddy. How did you meet him? Give us that little background.
Okay, so what was really neat about Teddy? Well, let's go back just a hair. The
Yeah.
first
Take us
watch
back.
interview I actually really did that was on, by a significant person or a significant watch brand, excuse me, like blogger or whatever, was actually Revolution. Have you ever heard of Revolution magazine?
I have, yes.
Okay, so Waco, the owner of Revolution, and he also owns the Rake, had heard the Panerai story that I share about, which is very personal, about a tragedy, and he interviewed me, and I think my name kind of got out there a little bit, maybe more because of that. Well, one of the guys who works for Teddy is a friend of mine, who actually um, is an artist, and his name's Justin Souders, and he does some amazing watch art. He's a great dude, and he is friends with one of my friends in the tactical community, John Willis from Special Operations Equipment. So I don't know if you've ever heard of SOE Gear, but SOE Gear, I've known that John for a long time through another friend of mine who passed away a few years ago in the tactical community, James Yeager of Tactical Response.
Yeah, James.
And
Because James, I followed him for many years.
James was a dear friend of mine.
Yeah.
I known him for 20 years, and a good man. Trained with him, learned a lot from him. But yeah. So anyway, so Justin's friend works for Teddy, and Teddy was starting. I just had one of them cicadas attack me.
Yeah.
You can probably hear him in the background. It's insane right now. But so anyway, Teddy started doing these interviews because Teddy. I like Teddy because he takes a different approach. Some of
Sure.
these other YouTubers and watch bloggers are all about like the highest end brands. Richard Mill, Patek, AP,
Mhm.
all this stuff, which is cool and it's interesting. But the average person can't really afford things like that.
Sure.
So where Teddy really, in my opinion, had filled a niche was, I mean, he's talking about everything from there, but all
Hmm.
the way to, Timex and Seiko
Yeah.
and Citizen and things like that. And I think that's where it brings in so many more people
Right.
in that way. So Teddy was starting to do this interview series with average people, just not celebrities, not athletes, just kind of more average type people. And I was the fourth interview. What happened was my friend who also works for Teddy, who I became friends with. I don't know if I could say his name. That's why I'm just kind of leaving it
Yeah.
out
No,
for
that's
right
fine.
now. But
Yeah.
anyway, he was like, he told Teddy, he was like, hey, for your interview thing, you should check out Greg Watchman. And he was like, okay, send me some of his stuff. What kind of watches? He just looked at some of my collection and thought it was interesting with my line of work, and was like, yeah, let's interview him. And that's how it happened. And he flew me out, and I went out there to Cleveland and
Yeah.
did an interview with him. And he's great. Teddy is
So for
such
all
a
the
good dude.
viewers watching who might not know who Teddy is, you can just Google his name. He's huge in the watch community. He just opened up a brick and mortar store out in Cleveland, and his boutique is awesome. I actually want to go. I'm not too far away. I'm about 5 hours from Cleveland. So one of my goals is to take a weekend out there and go actually see it, and to see if he's around to actually meet him. But
Yeah.
I want to check it out. But um, you know, I know we have time frames that we're set. Um, I want to move into. I know you had the tragedy, but I want to save that for a different episode if we can. Because
Yeah,
I'd like to
that's fine.
walk through that whole thing, because I know you're big in the Panaristi community, and I love that story. That's fantastic how they supported you and got around you. But I think we could do a whole nother segment based on just that
Sure.
alone. So
Yeah.
we'll continue today with. I know you brought some watches with to show
Yeah.
the viewers. Can you walk us through what you have in your collection, like what's in front of you, and maybe how
Yeah.
you acquired them, or a little bit
Yeah.
of backstory on each one?
Yeah, sure. Well, let me. I'm going to take a step back too that I want to share with you. You're asking about people I follow.
Okay.
So not only YouTube but Instagram as well. one that I'm an organization that I'm kind of a part of is a Sketchy Boys Watch Club, and this is one of
Okay.
their challenge coins, and it's for law enforcement and military guys that
Okay.
are into watches. You got to definitely check them out. Another
Yeah.
cool one: Watches of Espionage. A retired CIA case officer that is into watches, and this is one of his challenge coins. So, really cool organization.
Awesome.
And a great content online with some really cool history, relating to military intel and even some law enforcement and stuff too. So it's really cool stuff. Um, let's see here. Well, I'll share what we talked about earlier before we got it on live. The
Right.
good old moon swatch I got from Omega and Swatch. I When these came out, I was really excited about it, but we were told that they would be out online, and that
And
didn't happen.
correct.
So I got a little perturbed by that, and I was like, I'm not going in waiting in line for 3, 4, 5, 6 hours to get one of these things. I'm like, this is ridiculous. I mean, it's a cool watch. Don't get me wrong. And those of you
Right.
that did it, kudos, man. Good job. I just wasn't going to do it. I'm like, eventually it'll come out a little bit easier, and it was.
Sure. Right.
So I just got my moon swatch. I put a NATO strap on it to kind of change it up a little bit, and I bought that when I was with my kids in New York, and we were
Okay.
in Times Square. So I picked that
So
up.
real quick
Yeah,
on the moon swatch with the partnership between Omega and Swatch, it took a lot of flack in the watch community. People were like, "How can a brand as hot, like is elegant and as pronounced as Omega team up with Swatch?" And they took a lot of heat for it, but the marketing strategy behind it was genius. They
hundred
did a
percent.
phenomenal job. And I remember there was a quote, and I can't remember who said it, but they said the markups on those watches when they first came out to the people who actually waited in line all over the world, Europe. There was one in London that opened up at 7 in the morning, and the line was 3 days. People were waiting
Yeah,
72 hours to get them.
I remember. Yeah,
When they bought those watches for sub 250, 280, somewhere in there, some of them were going for $1,400, $1,500. So
I
when you
know.
take the percentage of the markup, that beat out every other brand, Rolexes, APs. Those
If you're taking
markups were
percentages, sure. Yeah.
right. So it was incredible. The strategy behind it was ingenious. Like, so I love the story that Omega actually took the chance to do it, and it got people into their brand. So
Yes, and that's
that
why I think it was a
was
great idea.
the biggest thing, right? So it was incredible. So that's a unique kind of parallel that, and I think now other brands. I know Black Plan's doing it, and the rumor is they said maybe Tudor might start going into that realm. We don't know yet. With the because I don't think the Rolex brand will ever go that way, but I
No, they
think the
never will.
sub might. So we'll see what happens. It's a unique parallel between watches. So it's a
Yeah,
great
I look. I thought it was a genius idea because some people were like, "Oh, it's gonna, you know, taint the brand or shame the
right.
brand or whatever." I'm like, "No, you're getting more people into watches."
Absolutely,
So
I
I,
agree.
I, I see no problem with it.
Sorry, what else we got?
Okay, so let's see. What should I go to now? Well, I got a kind of a green theme today.
Yeah, let's
Um,
let's do it.
I've got my IWC Spitfire chronograph.
That's a beautiful
Great
watch.
piece. Yeah, I when I saw this when it first came out when I was in New York at I think it was a Red Bar, one of our Red Bar global meetups in New York. And Red Bar, for those that don't know, is a collecting group. It's an international watch collecting group. I help run the Chicago chapter. That's where I'm based out of. So people that are interested can find our Instagram or look up my Instagram. Shoot us a message, and you can request a membership. And we vet people. We want to make sure that people that
Sure.
are wanting to be involved in our group, and we want everybody in just to make sure they're actual real watch people, not someone trying to steal
Right.
someone else's stuff. You know what I mean? But anyway, I saw it there and it just spoke to me. It was really tactical looking. And again, me being with my background, I like tactical
Sure.
things. Another fun one, the Seiko Arnie.
Hmm.
So this is an analog digital watch based on the Commando watch that he wore in the movie Commando. I had to get this. Yeah, I mean, it's just fun. It's just a
Sure.
cool watch, man. So those are watches I'll wear when I'm on the range, when I'm out in the woods, things like that. And then one of my favorites that I wear, and I'm actually going to be wearing it tomorrow. Tomorrow I'll be doing um, I'm doing a class. I'm uh, a shooting school, and I'll probably be wearing this one here, which is my
The
Breitling,
Breitling. Yeah.
the a Chrono Avenger Night Mission. Like my first like luxury high end, all black watch, if you will.
Hmm.
And the black and green combo I thought was just really killer. And this strap I actually got from Triple Aught Design, TAD. They make
They make
gear and
great
stuff.
gear.
Yeah, they
Yeah.
do. So
Yeah.
this came out, and I remember Adam Craniotis, the one of the founders of Red Bar. Him and Kathleen are the founders, but Adam picked up one of these for one of his watches. I don't remember, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, I gotta get that!" And I wound up picking that up. Um, let's see. We'll talk about a couple little independents too. I actually won this in a contest, and but it's one of my friend's brands here in Chicago, Time Watches. This is one of their Mecha Quartz pieces. It's absolutely beautiful. Um, he
It
made
looks really good. I
Yeah,
like it.
and it's a wonderful price point. He's coming out with some really neat stuff. There is mechanical stuff out there as well, but this is the Mecha Quartz that I've got. Another cool brand is a brand called Astor and Banks and Matter of Time. So it's kind of like two brands. But the Matter of Time watch was designed by a friend of mine with my friend who owns Astor and Banks. And the concept of this watch is those that purchase the first ones, we wear it for 1 to 2 years, and then we have to gift it to someone. And the money, the proceeds will go to a charity for the initial purchase. But the whole point is we share stories in like a time capsule of when we've worn the piece, why
Okay.
we've worn it, things like that, and then we'll pass it on to someone else to let them share their stories.
Sure. What a
And the
great
idea,
story, right?
yeah, it's cool. And then
Yeah.
the idea is maybe in like 20 years or something like that, a bunch of people will get together with some of the watches that wore them and things like
Hmm.
that and talk and share about the stories of which, when they wore that watch. So it's really cool. We have several different brands in the Chicago area that do things. Far and Swit is one. Okanaska is another. So it's really cool.
Okay.
And then let's see. Then I
So what
brought
we'll do
yeah,
after the show ends,
yeah,
we'll put the links to all the places in your
sure.
Chicagoland area. So if anybody's interested in buying a watch,
I
we'll
think
link
it's a
them up
great idea.
in on my YouTube. I'll put all the in the description where they can purchase them.
Yeah,
So
that's
if
great.
someone's interested.
Yeah, yeah. And then I just got the last two that I brought up. Well, actually, I forgot talking about the watch on my wrist. But my Submariner. It's funny because I always said I would never get a Rolex Submariner. And then
It's
one of
just.
my friends let me wear his 41 millimeter after they first came out because I was like, what's all the hype? I wore it for
Do you
about.
think the Rolex Submariner is like the standard into the luxury market? What I mean, I pretty much think it is
I
for
mean,
the
a lot
most
of
part.
people think I
It's
do think that because of the name Rolex and Rolex. I mean, look, I mean, there's a reason why they copy this watch so
right.
much, and what I mean by they is other brands that pay homage basically to it, and so many watches look like a Submariner or try to look like a Submariner, but it's a wonderful watch.
Yeah.
It really is. Um, Rolex they're a great brand. I poo pooed them for a long time, and then I started getting into them. Now I have three different ones, so
Sure.
I like them. And then my Vacheron Constantine dual time. Um, and I recently got a bespoke strap from Jean Rousseau. Uh, so we went through and I picked out the materials, the stitching. I wanted to go with like a brown croc on the outside, and I did something kind of fun on the inside. Is I went with a camouflage, like a gray camo pattern
Okay.
on the inside, and I had my initials etched in it too. So just a fun piece. This was actually
Sure.
gifted to me by my father. I actually helped him pick this out years ago in New York, and then gifted it to me recently because he doesn't wear it that
Vacheron's
much.
making a resurgence in the watch world. They're
Oh
really
man,
coming.
they
They're
are.
one of the probably more up and coming brands now in the big, because obviously you have the big five, but I think they're really starting to make their pendulum swing back up into.
I'm curious. I've never heard the term Big Five. I've always heard the term Big Three, which has been Rolex, or excuse me, AP, Patek, and Vacheron. What are the Big Five? Because I haven't
So
heard that one.
so the big five that like we always kind of were uh, pronounced with was as far as like heritage went was Rolex, AP, Patek, eight Jaeger Le Couture, and Vacheron Constants. And then so those were always kind of the like is like the standard for it. But now we're like in the watch world, like Richard Mille took off, right? Most people don't understand why a carbon fiber watch is worth a $500,000. Like people just don't, they can't grasp the concept.
Yeah,
And they're so, they kind of started their marketing almost like Cartier did, right? Where you have to own a piece to get a piece. So they
yeah,
won't sell you one unless you own a previous one. So it's like a Ferrari, right? Ferrari won't sell you a Ferrari unless you own one, and you can't trade it off. You have to keep it for so many years. So Richard Mille is kind of like that in the watch world. If I had $1 million and I want to buy a watch, you should sell me the watch for $1 million. They won't. They'll say you got to buy these three before you can get this one. So you're spending $1 million on watches to buy $1 million watch. It's the
yeah,
most ridiculous thing. Where I think we're like Jacob and Company does phenomenal stuff, and Jacob will sell you a $500,000 watch. You walk in his boutique in New York, say I like that watch. If you write him a check, you walk away with the watch. There's no pre-buying. And at Richard Mille, I don't know how they have a very unique campaign that they're running, but that's just how they operate. You can't just go into a boutique and buy one. You have to own prior ones.
Well, yeah, but yeah, I mean, how else? How do you get a prior one? So
Right.
it's a lot of that is, I don't work in the industry, so I can't speak to it, but I think they basically help pick their own clients. You know
Right.
what I mean? Which is kind of interesting. But Patek is like that too with a
Yeah.
lot of pieces. So a lot of these brands are kind of, it's harder and harder to get some of them than others. Um, but I mean, Richard Mille, not my style. I can
Yeah.
appreciate the craftsmanship in it. I've
Sure.
got a few friends that have them. They love them. It just doesn't do anything for
Yeah.
me.
Because
I
so
mean,
so my I don't know like how they got to where they're at. Obviously, their marketing and their technique, but you look at brands like Richard Mille isn't kind of their the way that they created their watches. Hublot's been doing that for 40 years, right? The big carbon fiber
yeah,
watches, but Hublot kind of hit a stalemate, right? They just kind of were like they went from hot on fire to nothing, and then Richard Mille kind of picks up, and it's like Hublot's been doing this for a while. Those big, thick carbon fiber watches with great movements, they just kind of hit a stalemate. And Richard Mille is like they're still climbing the mountain. Like they're still one of the most sought after watches. And you kind of just find brands that had a really grossing watch just kind of fall off. And I feel like Hublot is in that boat, right? They've been doing it for a while, and just they kind of just fell to the wayside.
yeah.
For
Well, I mean, RM's been around for a minute
sure,
too,
right,
though. I
right,
mean,
yeah,
they have, but I think all these brands kind of certain things will ebb and flow
mm-hmm.
with stuff. But my whole take on any of that is I don't buy something because it's hot. I don't buy something because it's going to appreciate in value. I don't care.
Right.
I buy what I like.
That's
I
exactly
buy
right.
something because it speaks to me.
Sure.
It gives me a certain feeling when I put it on my wrist. That's why I buy, and that's the only reason I buy. And I've never sold any of my pieces.
Mm-hmm.
Um, I keep everything. Oh, and then I'll share the last one before I don't know when we're cutting out, but my my Panerai, which is about the story, we'll share on
Right.
the next run.
Sure.
But this is a Panerai 372. Today I'm wearing a gunny strap. Gunny straps are really cool. They make some neat stuff. Um, but this is kind of a lot of people think this is like the best DNA of a Panerai, or one of the best DNAs of a Panerai, because Panerai's got a hell of a lot of history.
Right.
But yeah, I mean, there's so much out there, so many different brands, micro brands, all kinds of stuff. I mean, it's really cool.
Right. So the micro brand now is actually kind of a unique type of almost niche in the watch community, right? Most
Yeah.
people are starting them because they say, okay, well, I can create the same kind of watch for a fraction of the cost. Buy my watch, it's $400. It'll last just as long as a $4,000 watch. So I think it's kind of the trend now is like the micro brands is kind of set in now where it's like it's the appeal to most people to get into watches that can't afford the high end luxury ones. So it's be kind of the new trend now in the watch world,
Yeah,
which
and the
is
micro there are some really great micro brands out there. I mean, there's all kinds. I know I don't know if you're aware of this, but maybe some of your viewers might, or you should check out Wind Up, which is coming up in Chicago in July. Wind Up is a basically like a micro brand watch event, and
mhm,
they bring all these micro brands together in different parts of the country. So Chicago will have that coming up. It's great. There are thousands of people that show up for this. I've been going every year for the last several years. Um, it's awesome because you can really learn about a lot of these smaller brands, these micro brands that are making some really cool stuff out there
sure,
for not that much money. You know
right,
what I mean?
yeah,
You don't have to, get a Rolex. You know what I
right,
mean? There are these other brands out there that make awesome watches for a fraction of the price. That's still really good
yeah,
stuff. So,
right.
it just depends. It just depends on
And
what you want.
and some of them are even setting up shop in Geneva, right? So when I was working at the jewelry store, one of the brands we started carrying was Frederic Constant,
Yep.
which
A
was
smaller brand. Yep.
right was built in a small little shop in Geneva, Switzerland. So it's on Watch Row,
Yeah.
and they said, well, we can produce the same kind of movements built in house that the big brands at literally fraction of the cost. You can get a nice Frederic Constant for about $1,200, and they look like $1 million. They're
Yes.
it's a
They
great
make.
watch and a great
They do.
company and a great story. A husband and wife team said we can
Yep.
do it better than the big guys.
Yeah. Well, I mean, yeah, that's true. But I will say also, though, I truly believe you get what you pay for.
Sure. Oh, absolutely.
And I think buying something as expensive as a Rolex or a Breitling or a Panerai and things like that, um, the materials they use, the way
Right.
the movements are constructed,
Absolutely.
some that have proprietary
Sure.
movements.
Sure. Absolutely.
Um, I mean,
And the heritage.
they well, and the heritage too,
Yeah.
but they are doing something a little different at a different level. But that's not to knock on any of those micro brands. Those micro brands are making some really good stuff
Yeah.
too. It just whatever your price point is, you can find something that's awesome.
That's it. I agree. So let's do this. We'll end it here. So thank you for being on the show, Greg.
Sure, I
We
appreciate you
will
having me.
do this in a couple months down the road. If you don't mind telling your story, I think it really touches,
Sure.
the human side to, you know, getting into, the watch world and your connection to it from that. Um, I don't want to ruin it for anybody, so I'll let you tell the story from pretty much start to finish. But that's what really kind of tugged when I watched the interview with Teddy. So that's kind of was like I told my wife, I'm like, you got to watch this. This is amazing. And like I
Yeah,
just
thank
found the
you.
connection with you, just obviously for the law enforcement side of things, but like going through that story, like it really kind of really hit home for me. So that was what made me reach out to you and to do this. So
Well, I
but
appreciate
but
it,
I
man.
want I want the world to hear it. So I think that what you've been able to overcome is then kind of a tragedy into where you're at now. I'm sure it was not easy, but I don't want to foreshadow the next episode, but we'll get into that whole story if you don't mind
Sure.
telling
No.
it. That'd be great. So
Yeah.
but so thanks again, Greg, for being
Yeah.
a
Thank you
great
for
guest,
having
and
me.
then
This was a lot of
so
fun.
everybody on, guys, we'll link all the stuff that Greg talked about. He'll send me all the stuff before I put it on YouTube, and we'll link up to everything from all the events that are happening. If you're interested in going to where we can get the watches that he showed, and we'll put it on YouTube, and we'll see Greg in a few months, and we'll end the show here, and we'll welcome him back in a few months.
All right, man.
So,
Take
all
care.
right,
Thank you
thanks,
very
Greg. I
much.
appreciate it. All right, we'll see you guys soon.